Welcome to the 12th episode of the AfterSessions. Irene Sendler, Life in a
Look at the Holocaust, we often ask, how did the world just watch? This can be explained by the bystander effect, where individuals are less likely to offer help to a victim in an emergency when other people are present. This ultimately leads to pluralistic ignorance, where everyone stays silent simply because everyone else is staying silent.
Irene Sendler was an antidote to that silence. Born in 1910 in the Polish town of Otwock, she studied Polish literature at Warsaw University and joined the Socialist Party before becoming a social worker. She was nearly 30 when the Nazis took over the Warsaw through ruthless aerial bombardments and a brutal occupation that would last the duration of the war. As Nazi tanks rolled in, Irene began offering food and shelter to Jews in the neighborhood.
Then came the Warsaw Ghetto. Some 400,000 Jewish people were forced into 1.3 square miles of space. Between 1939 and 1942, Irene, along with friends and colleagues, made over 3,000 false documents to help Jewish families escape the ghetto, saving many lives. After joining the underground Polish organization Zegota in December 1942, she used her social welfare department permit to enter the Warsaw Ghetto under the guise of checking for signs of typhus.
Wearing a Star of David, a primary symbol of Judaism, to show her solidarity, Irene began talking Jewish parents into giving up their children, who faced near sure fates of dying in the ghetto or death camps.
Along with a group of about 25 volunteers, mostly women, Irene smuggled the children past Nazi guards using various methods. Sometimes Irene took children out in an ambulance, hidden under a stretcher or in the trolley, concealed in trunks or suitcases.
After removing the children from the ghetto, Irene and her workers adopted them into the homes of Polish families or hid them in convents and orphanages. They ensured that each family hiding a child knew he or she must be returned to Jewish relatives after the war. Meanwhile, Irene made lists of the children's real names on thin tissue paper and hid them in jars, which she buried under an apple tree across the street from the German barracks.
Irene operated on pure pro social behavior, which are acts intended to benefit other people or society as a whole. While the world saw a crowd of victims, she saw individual children with individual futures. She possessed what we call high moral courage, the ability to act on ethical beliefs despite the overwhelming risk to her own life.
It's a striking contrast to how most people were paralyzed by the scale of the horror. But Irene broke the horror down into a series of tasks: one child, one fake ID, one safe house. She moved from a state of observation to a state of intervention, refusing to let the presence of others excuse her own inaction.
The Nazi regime didn't rely on violence alone, it relied on psychology. People were stripped of names, reduced to numbers, separated from their histories, their families, even their reflections of self. Dehumanization wasn't just about control, it was about making destruction feel easier, more distant, and more acceptable.
And psychologically, that reflects processes we understand as dehumanization and depersonalization. Once individuality is removed, empathy becomes easier to suppress. A person stops being perceived as a complete human being and instead becomes an object, a category, a statistic. The destruction begins psychologically long before it becomes physical.
Irene Sendler recognized that immediately. Saving children wasn't only about getting them out of the ghetto alive, it was about preserving the parts of them the regime was trying to erase. The names hidden inside those glass jars weren't just records, they were psychological lifelines. Proof that beneath the false identities and forced separation, their real selves still existed.
And in psychology, this connects deeply to the preservation of self concept. Identity is built through memory, relationships, names, and continuity. Without those things, people can experience profound fragmentation, a loss of connection to who they are. Irene understood that survival without identity could still leave lasting psychological damage.
Which is why the lists mattered so much. They created the possibility of restoration. One day, these children could reconnect with their families, their histories, their names.
And that's what makes her actions psychologically extraordinary. In an environment designed to erase identity entirely, she resisted by preserving it, quietly, systematically, almost invisibly. She fought against psychological annihilation itself, because sometimes the most powerful form of resistance isn't only keeping someone alive, it's making sure the world cannot erase who they are.
Despite saving thousands, Irene Sendler had nightmares every single night of her life, asking herself, did I do enough? This is a tragic look at survivor guilt, a phenomena occurring due to the guilt of having survived an event that others did not. Even though she was the hero, she lived with the weight of the ones she couldn't reach.
This stems from an extreme internal locus of control, which is the belief that you are the primary architect of your own life and that your actions dictate your outcomes, rather than leaving things up to fate, luck, or external circumstances. But when you believe you have the power to change things, you also carry the crushing weight of everything you couldn't change.
It's the paradox of the humanitarian. The more you do, the more you see what is left undone. Her trauma wasn't just from what she witnessed, but from the impossible standards she set for her own soul.
In 1943, the Gestapo finally caught her. They broke both her legs and feet, trying to force out the names of the children and the people helping her. But she gave them nothing.
Psychologically, this reflects what researchers describe as cognitive hardness. Individuals who possess an intense commitment to a purpose can sometimes endure extraordinary levels of suffering because their attention shifts away from the self. Instead of focusing on pain, fear, or survival, the mind locks onto something perceived as more important. In Irene's case, that focus was the children, the names hidden beneath the apple tree, and the lives depending on her silence.
And what's remarkable is that her resistance wasn't only physical. The Nazis wanted information, but they also wanted psychological surrender. Confession would have meant accepting defeat, accepting that fear had finally become stronger than purpose. But even under torture, she refused to let them control the story she believed about herself.
There's also an element of meaning making here. Psychologists have long observed that suffering becomes more psychologically tolerable when it's attached to a larger purpose. Pain without meaning often destroys people. Pain tied to protection, responsibility, or sacrifice can become survivable.
Which raises a difficult question. How far can conviction really carry the human mind? At what point does belief become strong enough to overpower fear, pain, even the instinct for self preservation?
And maybe an even harder one. When someone risks everything for strangers, what does that reveal about human nature itself? Because history often focuses on cruelty during war, but people like Irene force us to confront the existence of extraordinary moral courage as well.
After the war, Irene returned to those buried jars and uncovered the names she had protected for years. She tried to reunite the children with their families, only to discover that many of the parents had died in the camps. But because of her, those children still had something the war had tried to erase their identities, their histories, their connection to who they were.
Irene Sandler proved that while hate can burn a city to the ground, a bit of ink and a glass jar can keep the truth alive. She showed us that the most powerful thing you can do for a person is to remember their name when the world wants them forgotten.
She teaches us that empathy isn't a passive feeling but an active rebellion. When the system demanded complicity, her quiet paperwork became a weapon of mass preservation.
Her legacy is a warning that silence is a choice, but so is courage. History remembers the names of the conquerors because they were written in blood. Irene Sendler wrote the names of the muted on tissue paper and buried them in a place
Where they could grow.